While we may have taken a few weeks off from Harpin on rugby, that certainly doesn't mean we haven't been watching it. There has, of course, been some amazing matches in the Rugby Championship, while in the Northern Hemisphere, of course, the Top 14 League always kicks off way before all the others. But where the real rugby attention has been rightly focused over that time has been on the Women's Rugby World Cup over in England, with Ireland battling their way to a narrow quarterfinal defeat to France, and the host Red Roses set to play Canada in the final next Saturday at Twickenham. I've personally been enjoying the competition primarily as a fan in recent weeks, but with us we have Tom Coleman, who's been heavily involved in coaching at high levels of the women's game for a while. So it would be rude not to get his take. Starting with Ireland's performance, Tom, how do you think we got on?
Look, I ended up watching the quarterfinal. The team I coached, Balbriggan senior women's team, we had a pre-season down in Dolphin on Saturday, and we stayed overnight. And the we're in a pub in Cork at sort of 12, half 12 on a Sunday, and the pub was jammed, looking at Ireland versus France. So, but that tells you now. Granted, there was about 45 of us, so that helped the attendance. But that aside, the pub was still pretty full, with lots of fans, and the Ireland France game was on 7 or 8 screens around the pub, at that hour of the morning. So that alone as a little microcosm tells you where the Irish game and the Irish women's standing has come. Just in the job I work with, you get to talk to a lot of people, and they obviously know I like my rugby, and was like probably talking to rugby over the years, but people who never watched women's rugby, clued in, and how do you think we'll do, Tom, this weekend? Or did you look at the random game Canada Australia? So the chat was there amongst what I'd call the Irish sporting fan that wouldn't necessarily be clued in to watch the Irish senior women's team. So in that context, it's been a huge success. Um, Look, I've been going to women's Six Nations games for a long time now. Over the years, used to bring different teams, underage teams and stuff. So I've seen the good and the bad. And I remember being up in Ravenhill, and it's not that long ago we played Scotland up there. And again, trying to paint some context where we're at and where we were. Like it was a very hard watch. It was the low ebb of Irish women's rugby. The relationship with the RFU was going on at the background of that, and just everything just seemed. It was a wet, miserable day in Kingspan as it was then, and I think the weather suited the mood around the squad and the team and the vibe, and to come from there to what they've done over the last sort of 18 months is absolutely outstanding. France is a team we struggled really to get near over the last few years, and you know bar those 40 odd phases before half time where we felt, looking at the game, it was a possible 18, 20 point lead that wind was, and it turned out that it was, with just the extra try that was needed. But that's how close Ireland were. What that comes down to, they'll learn from, hopefully, maybe a little bit of composure, just something different. Don't be, and against good, resolute French defence, in fairness to them as well. But I think overall it's been a big success. I know the old cliche about Ireland and quarterfinals and blah blah blah, that goes out the window. It's internet trolls and the like can have their day, but just an excitement amongst the Irish rugby supporters first and foremost, to shout them on, and then just the wider public were interested in them. Look, I was over at the Ireland New Zealand game. Never mind the result, which was a disappointing day, but there was the guts of 20,000 Irish over there, which is unbelievable. There was over 30,000 in the stadium at Brighton, and over 20,000 of that was Irish supporters. And just the atmosphere felt every bit as good as any of the Six Nations games I've gone over the years. Probably even better because it was in a smaller stadium, and the people who were there were passionate about shouting for the Irish females rugby team. So, you remove the corporate element of rugby that we've all suffered from the last 10, 15, 20 years. I know that's money, 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 but it is what it is. But there was a bit more, I don't know, a bit more grassroots feel about that game, and the crowd. It was just an outstanding occasion. Results aside, they were unlucky again. A lot of possession, a lot of territory, just couldn't get the ball over the line. And maybe that's something the coaching staff will probably look at now, given the amount of time they probably spent at the 22 against France and against New Zealand, to come back with 13 points in those two games. is the one area where they're, that's sort of translating red zone pressure into scores is the next phase of this Irish team. And it is a young team. Um, Unfortunately, Linda Dujang seems to have announced her retirement. It's worth mentioning her. She's been an absolute legend for Irish rugby. One of the best tight heads in women's rugby. Just and a lovely person to boot as well. Like she lives down in Rush and has been helpful to any of the clubs in that area over the years about trying to promote female and girls youth rugby around that area or anywhere around the country, to be fair. So yeah, worth giving a hat tip for Linda as well. But yeah, I thought the competition then itself I think it was a massive success. Obviously Twickenham is sold out for the weekend, and look, there's people who would listen to this pod. Hopefully, there's go week by week, go week to week, looking at AIL or maybe the URC is their cup of tea, or maybe just international rugby is their cup of tea. I would ask them, just if they got a chance to highlight reels, to go back and look at Canada's performance against New Zealand. Absolutely outstanding performance. Coaches only dream of a sort of 1 to 15, 1 to 23, sort of all court press, as they used to say in the NBA with the Boston Celtics back in the day, or the Lakers. But that's what Canada felt like. I'm not saying Canada are going to beat England on the weekend, but just about nearly total rugby across all and that's why I ask anyone that's listening, just have a look at some of the rugby that was played by Canada against a very, very good New Zealand team. So that the quality of women's rugby is just going up and up and up, and I think a barometer for it as well is the quality of kicking for points. It was always a bit of Achilles heel in the women's rugby, but bloody hell, the girls are putting on an exhibition from the boot, kicking from sidelines, and I say that as a female rugby coach. I've been coaching in women's rugby for over 10 years, and so I'm not saying it as some sort of mansplaining thing about being able to kick the ball, but the guys could learn a thing or two from some of the quality of the kicking that we've seen on show in the Women's Rugby World Cup from any of the teams that have kicked penalties or conversions. Just a really, really outstanding quality of kicking. So yeah, all in all, whilst it was disappointing in the end for Ireland, just the context of where we've been and the context of the performance against France, against a team that we struggled for a long time against, and then the success of the World Cup, it's been hopefully to get a good competitive final between England and Canada just to finish it off.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important context is like what you said about the casual fans following this competition, because it's important to get them not just, to get them following the game and going forward, and just understanding just what, that you can't compare the women's team to the men's team. It's a different, it's the same code, but it's a different sport, really, with a whole group of different players, different people. And to say, I heard a lot of that as well. Oh, another quarterfinal defeat for Ireland. I mean, the Irish women have reached the semifinal in the past. And but in this case, in the women's rugby world, you've got this top four at the moment: England, New Zealand, France, and Canada. They ended up making the semifinals as expected. And while there is a gap to all the other teams, you look at this Ireland team, like you say, had the depth. They didn't qualify for the last World Cup. They finished last in the Six Nations. They had all that happening, but now they've gotten to a stage where they're now fifth in the world. They're literally the best of the rest at the moment, and they came closest to causing an upset in that quarterfinals. The first half, I know you mentioned the series of phases at the end was disappointing, but up to that point, they'd almost put on a masterclass of playing in wet conditions that any men's, women's, any kind of team would have appreciated. The kicking, Dan O'Brien's kicking, the kicking game, the support play, the finishing, right up to the end there, where there was a lot of French resistance on that line as well. It was like, what is it, 20, 30 phases in that set right at the end. But up to then, they built that lead, and it was an amazing display. And there's a lot of big scores in the competition, big wins, big margin of wins, but that was a close one. That was a tight game, and it was a credit to the girls. And I think it's important to just stress that this is a squad that's on the up, and they continued that. They've done well in WXV tournaments, they've done well in Six Nations, and now they've had good displays here. Now it's important to bring that on, and hopefully to the next World Cup, raise another level again. And in terms of the women's game as a whole, that top four, I mean, that Canada New Zealand game, amazing performance. A lot of people would have expected maybe New Zealand to win that, but Canada were ready for them. They had a big win over Ireland, and that we saw what they could do in the warm up matches. But they've gotten themselves into the final, and like I say, they seem to have they come up with a good strategy. They played well as a team on the pitch, and they could really bring it to the Red Roses in the final. Obviously, they're going to be heavily favorites. Home team, they are the best team in the world, and all that kind of stuff. Full-time professionals, all of that. But you never know. You just never know. And like you say, the attendances as well. It's going to be a sellout crowd in Twickenham for the final. And from an Irish point of view, we've got a Six Nations game in the Aviva Stadium coming up next season. Ticket sales for that are very impressive as well. So it's important just to keep the word out there and keep the awareness of the game going on from this World Cup.
Yeah, you've exactly hit what I was going to say. I think the goal now of the rugby community, and anyone that's especially involved with the women's side of it, and the RFU, is to sell out that bottom tier of the Aviva. If you can get 25,000 in for that Six Nations game, and they should push it just to every club. And there's I think in Leinster there's over 50 or 60 teams now have about 40 have women's teams, and when you develop that out to U teams as well, it's over 60 clubs. So big push. That's only Leinster. There should, let's expand that right across the four provinces. There should be a really big push to encourage big numbers to get to that game, because that would sort of give them another boost again, and another step in the right direction. And not to let this good feeling go from the World Cup, and just let it sort of fall away and forget about the Irish women's team again for another while. I think they really have to grab the bull by the horns here now, and get the girls out on social media, which they were brilliant during the World Cup, just for promoting the game. Some characters like Eve Higgins, etc. Just get them out in front of TV. Get them out. If the URC have a game on and it's Scarlets versus Connacht on a Friday, I'd like to see here Eve Higgins on RT or Virgin Media, or somebody like that, just having a chat about the game, because they know their stuff.
Absolutely.
So keep pushing these people, and their faces will become as recognizable as Gary Ringrose or Johnny Sexton or whoever. That's the next stage. The RFU have to back these girls to push on for the next World Cup. Because, as I said, apart from one or two, it is a young team. So let's build on it and try and bridge that gap to England and France as best as we can.
Absolutely. And when it comes to women's rugby coverage, I couldn't talk about this without giving another shout out to our good friends at the Mother Ruckers podcast, Alvo Nolan and Keena Muller. They've both been frequently on Harpin on Rugby, but they have a great pod going with. They get all the women's stars of the women's game, the Irish women's game on. They have some great chats, great stories, great conversations, and all the latest insights as to what's going on. So do check that out as well. Listen, that's great, Tom. Many thanks for that. And well, if you, the viewer, have any thoughts yourself on the World Cup, was it good or bad, or what did you think? And any aspect of the women's game, please leave your comments below. And sure, while you're at it, be sure to like, share, and subscribe as well.